The cold wind rattled the windows of Delilah Blackwood's small homestead just outside Denver, Colorado, in the winter of 1883. The sound barely registered in her grief-stricken mind as she sat motionless in the wooden rocking chair, staring at the empty cradle beside her. 3 days had passed since she'd buried her infant son, William, in the small plot behind the house, 3 days that felt like 3 lifetimes. Delilah's fingers absently traced the intricate carvings on the cradle her husband James had made before he'd been killed in a mining accident 6 months prior. Now both were gone, leaving her alone in a house that once held such promise. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to mere embers, but Delilah couldn't summon the energy to tend to it. The cold seemed fitting for the emptiness in her heart. A knock at the door startled her. In this remote area, visitors were rare, especially during the harsh Colorado winter. Delilah considered ignoring it, but something, perhaps the last remnants of her sense of propriety, compelled her to rise from the chair. Her legs felt wooden and unsteady as she crossed the room. When she opened the door, the biting wind rushed in along with a dusting of snow. Standing on her porch was Matthew Shaw, the owner of the neighboring ranch. His tall frame blocked much of the evening light, his broad shoulders dusted with snow. The cowboy removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his deep voice gentle. "I've come to check on you. Folks in town are worried." Delilah stared at him, her mind struggling to form a coherent response. Matthew Shaw had always been polite but distant in their few interactions since she and James had moved to the area a year ago. Now he stood on her doorstep with concern etched across his weathered face. "I'm fine," she said automatically. Though the hoarseness of her unused voice betrayed her, Matthew's eyes, a striking shade of blue, took in her disheveled appearance and the darkened house behind her. "You haven't been into town in days. Reverend Thompson asked me to bring you these." He held out a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "There's food, some preserves, and fresh bread." Delilah made no move to take it. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity, Mrs. Blackwood. It's what neighbors do." His voice remained gentle but firm. "May I come in? That fire needs tending." Before she could refuse, he stepped past her into the house, bringing with him the scent of pine and horses. Delilah closed the door more out of habit than conscious decision. Matthew placed the basket on the table and moved to the hearth, assessing the dying fire. Without asking permission, he added logs from the nearly empty wood box and stoked the flames until they leaped to life, casting warm light throughout the small front room. "Your wood supply is low," he observed, turning to face her. "I'll bring more tomorrow." "You don't need to do that," Delilah said, finding her voice at last. "I can manage." Matthew looked at her directly then, his gaze unflinching. "With all due respect, madam, you're not managing. And that's understandable." His voice softened. "I heard about your little boy. I'm deeply sorry for your loss." The simple acknowledgement of her grief broke something inside Delilah. Tears welled in her eyes for the first time since the funeral. She turned away quickly, unwilling to break down in front of this virtual stranger. "Mrs. Blackwood, Delilah," Matthew said, taking a tentative step closer. "I know something of what you're feeling. I lost my wife and infant daughter to fever 5 years ago." Delilah looked back at him, seeing him for the first time. The sorrow in his eyes was authentic, a mirror to her own. "I won't tell you the pain goes away," he continued, "because it doesn't, not completely. But you can't sit alone in a cold house. It doesn't honor their memory." "What would you know about how I should honor my son's memory?" Delilah snapped, anger suddenly flaring through her grief. "I know that letting yourself freeze or starve to death won't bring him back," Matthew replied calmly. Your husband wouldn't want that for you. Your son wouldn't want it either. Delilah's legs gave way and she sank onto the nearest chair. How am I supposed to go on? She whispered. There's nothing left. Matthew didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the kitchen area and began unpacking the basket. First, you eat something. Then you sleep. Tomorrow you get up and face another day. That's how it works. One moment at a time. As he spoke, he sliced bread and cheese, poured her a cup of still warm coffee from a flask in the basket, and placed it all before her. The simple, practical acts seemed to anchor Delilah to the present, pulling her back from the abyss of grief that threatened to consume her. I'm not hungry, she protested weakly. Eat anyway, Matthew instructed. Your body needs strength even if your heart feels broken. Something in his tone, not pity, but understanding, made Delilah pick up the bread and take a small bite. The taste barely registered, but the act of eating was strangely comforting, a return to normal human behavior when nothing felt normal anymore. Matthew sat across from her, his hat in his hands. As she ate, he spoke quietly of practical matters: the weather, his cattle, the comings and goings of Denver. His deep voice created a soothing backdrop that required no response from her. Delilah found herself relaxing slightly, the constant tension in her shoulders easing. When she had eaten a little, Matthew rose. I'll be back tomorrow with more firewood and supplies. Is there anything specific you need? Delilah shook her head, unable to think beyond the immediate moment. Try to get some rest, he said, placing his hat back on his head. And Mrs. Blackwood, the door to your root cellar is open. You might want to close it before critters get in. With that practical observation, he nodded respectfully and left, closing the door firmly behind him. Delilah sat in silence, listening to the sound of his horse's hooves growing fainter as he rode away. Despite herself, she rose and checked the root cellar door, finding it indeed ajar. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been down there. As she secured the latch, she realized Matthew's visit had done something unexpected. It had pulled her, however briefly, out of the fog of grief and into the practical world of living. She returned to the house, noticing for the first time in days the state of disarray. Dirty dishes were piled in the basin, clothes were strewn about, and dust had settled on every surface. James would have been appalled. He had always been so particular about their home. With a deep breath, Delilah gathered the dishes and began to wash them. The simple task occupied her hands, if not her mind, which still wandered to the tiny grave behind the house. But for the first time since burying William, she felt something other than grief, a tiny spark of purpose, however small. It wasn't much, but it was something. As promised, Matthew returned the next day with a wagon load of split firewood. Delilah, who had slept fitfully but better than previous nights, opened the door at his knock. She had made an effort to tidy herself, washing her face and securing her auburn hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Mrs. Blackwood, Matthew greeted her, removing his hat. I've brought that wood I promised. Thank you, Mr. Shaw, she replied formally. You didn't need to bring so much. Winter's not done with us yet, he said, glancing at the gray sky. Best to be prepared. He set to work stacking the wood along the side of the house, waving away Delilah's attempts to help. I've got this, he insisted. But if you've got coffee on, I wouldn't say no to a cup when I'm done. Delilah nodded and retreated inside to stoke the fire and put the coffee pot on. The simple act of preparing for a visitor felt strange, a return to normal life that seemed almost disrespectful to her grief. Yet there was comfort in the routine. When Matthew finished with the wood, he stamped the snow from his boots and entered the house. He accepted the coffee with a grateful nod, his hands engulfing the cup. You're looking better today, he observed, then immediately looked chagrined. Forgive me. That was too familiar. No, Delilah said softly. It's fine, and thank you for the wood, for everything. Matthew nodded, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. I brought something else, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small, carved wooden horse. I made this. It's nothing fancy, but I thought, maybe you'd like something to remember your boy by, something you can hold. Delilah took the carving with trembling hands. The little horse was beautifully crafted, smooth and solid in her palm. Tears welled in her eyes. My William never even saw a horse, she whispered. He was only 2 months old when the fever took him. I'm sorry, Matthew said, genuine regret in his voice. I didn't mean to upset you. No, Delilah clutched the carving tightly. It's beautiful, thank you. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Mrs. Blackwood, Matthew began hesitantly, I don't mean to overstep, but do you have family you could stay with? This is a hard place for a woman alone. Delilah shook her head. My parents died years ago. James was all the family I had. She paused. Until William. Matthew nodded in understanding. If you decide to stay, you should know you're not without friends here. The community looks after its own. Even the newcomers, Delilah asked with a hint of bitterness. She and James had moved to Colorado from St. Louis, seeking opportunity in the West. They had barely begun to know their neighbors before James's accident. Especially the newcomers, Matthew replied. This land is hard enough without people being hard on each other. Delilah studied him, this man who had shown her more kindness in 2 days than she'd experienced in months. Why are you doing this, Mr. Shaw? You hardly know me. Matthew's weathered face softened. When my wife and daughter died, I was in a bad way, worse than you if that's possible. Turned to the bottle, neglected my ranch, nearly lost everything. He stared into his coffee cup. An old rancher named Harmon Jenkins pulled me out of it, showed up every day, made me work, talked sense into me, never let me give up. He looked up at her. I'm just paying forward what was done for me. His honesty touched something in Delilah. For the first time in days, she felt a connection to another human being. I don't know if I can be saved, Mr. Shaw. It's not about being saved, he replied. It's about learning to live with the pain until it becomes bearable, and it will eventually. After finishing his coffee, Matthew rose to leave. I've got chores waiting, but I'll check on you tomorrow if that's all right. Delilah nodded, surprising herself with her willingness to see him again. True to his word, Matthew returned the next day and the day after that. His visits became a fixture in Delilah's life, a rhythm she could count on when everything else felt uncertain. Sometimes he brought supplies or game he had hunted. Other times he simply came to check on her, to talk, or often just to sit in companionable silence. As the days passed, Delilah found herself gradually emerging from the worst of her grief. She still visited William's grave each morning, but afterward, she would return to the house and attend to daily tasks. She cleaned, cooked simple meals, and even began to mend clothes that had been neglected. 2 weeks after his first visit, Matthew arrived with a small pine sapling in a burlap-wrapped ball of earth. I thought you might want to plant this for William, he explained. Come spring, it'll take root and grow, something living to mark his place. Delilah's throat tightened with emotion. I'd like that very much. Together they walked to the small grave, and Matthew dug a hole while Delilah held the sapling. The ground was still partly frozen, making the work difficult, but Matthew persisted until the hole was deep enough. Here, he said, stepping back, you should plant it. With careful movements, Delilah placed the sapling in the hole, then together they filled in the earth around it. When they finished, she stood back, looking at the small tree that would eventually grow tall and strong, a living monument to her son. Thank you, she whispered. This means more than I can say. Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. Life goes on, Mrs. Blackwood. Not the life we planned, maybe, but still life. As they walked back to the house, a light snow began to fall. Delilah glanced at Matthew's profile, noting the quiet strength in his features. For the first time, she saw him not just as a kind neighbor, but as a man, one who had suffered his own losses yet found the courage to continue. "Would you stay for supper, Mr. Shaw?" she asked impulsively. "I made a stew. It's nothing special, but there's plenty." Surprise flickered across Matthew's face, followed by a gentle smile. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Blackwood." That evening marked a subtle shift in their relationship. As they ate together at Delilah's small table, their conversation moved beyond grief and practicalities to more personal matters. Delilah learned that Matthew had come to Colorado as a young man, that he had built his ranch from nothing, that he enjoyed reading poetry when winter storms made outdoor work impossible. In turn, she found herself sharing stories of her life in St. Louis, of her hopes when she and James had decided to move west, of her brief joy at becoming a mother. "James and I tried for years to have a child," she confided. "When William finally came, it felt like a miracle, to lose them both so quickly." She trailed off. "Life can be cruel," Matthew acknowledged, "but it can also surprise you with unexpected kindness." As the weeks passed, Matthew's visits continued. Sometimes he brought books for Delilah to read, knowing her love of literature. Other times he helped with repairs around the homestead, fixing a leaky roof, mending the corral fence, tasks that James would have handled had he lived. Delilah found herself looking forward to these visits, planning for them, even dressing with more care. The realization that she might be developing feelings for Matthew both alarmed and consoled her. It seemed disloyal to James's memory, yet she couldn't deny the comfort she found in Matthew's presence. Spring arrived, bringing with it new life across the land. The pine sapling by William's grave put out new growth, tiny bright green needles against the older, darker foliage. The days grew longer, and Delilah spent more time outdoors, tending to the small vegetable garden James had started the previous year. One warm afternoon in April, Matthew arrived with a surprise: a milk cow and her calf. "My herd had a good year," he explained as he led the gentle-eyed Jersey into Delilah's corral. "This one's got a sweet temperament. Thought she might be useful to you." Delilah stared at the cow in disbelief. "Mr. Shaw, I can't accept such a valuable gift." "It's not charity," he assured her, echoing his words from months before. "Consider it an investment in a neighbor. Besides, that calf needs a name. Thought you might have ideas." The thoughtfulness of the gesture moved Delilah deeply. The cow was indeed practical. She would provide milk, butter, and eventually more calves, but the gift represented something more. Matthew believed in her future here, believed she could make a life for herself despite her losses. "Thank you," she said simply, reaching out to stroke the cow's velvety nose. "I think I'll call the calf Hope." Matthew's smile reached his eyes. "A good name." As the day waned, they sat together on Delilah's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. The air was filled with the scent of spring fresh grass, blooming wildflowers, the promise of renewal. "Mrs. Blackwood, Delilah," Matthew began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've been meaning to ask. The spring dance is happening in town next Saturday. Would you consider attending?" "With me?" Delilah's heart quickened. She hadn't been to a social event since William's death. The thought was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "You don't have to dance," Matthew assured her. "Just being among people again might do you good. And if it becomes too much, we can leave whenever you wish." Delilah considered his offer. Part of her wanted to refuse, to retreat back into the safety of her solitude and grief. But another part, a part that was gradually growing stronger, yearned for connection, for life. "All right," she said finally. "I'll go." The smile that illuminated Matthew's face was worth the anxiety the decision caused her. "I'll come for you at 6, he promised. After he left, Delilah went to her trunk and pulled out the one good dress she had brought from St. Louis. It would need pressing and perhaps some alterations. She had lost weight during her months of grief. As she held the blue fabric against herself, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. For the first time in months, there was color in her cheeks, a spark in her eyes. "I'm still here," she whispered to herself. "I'm still living." The night of the dance arrived clear and mild. Delilah spent the afternoon preparing, washing her hair with rosemary-scented water and arranging it in a style she hadn't attempted since James's death. The blue dress, once altered, fit well enough, though it hung a bit loose in places. When Matthew arrived, he wore a clean white shirt, dark vest, and his best trousers. His hair was neatly combed and he had trimmed his beard. The sight of him made Delilah's breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said, genuine admiration in his eyes. "Thank you," Delilah replied, a blush warming her cheeks. "You look quite handsome yourself." The ride into Denver was pleasant, the road dry after several days without rain. Matthew kept the conversation light, sensing Delilah's nervousness about returning to society after so long. The dance was being held in the community hall, a simple but spacious building in the center of town. As they approached, Delilah could hear music and laughter spilling out into the evening air. Her steps faltered. "We don't have to stay long," Matthew reminded her gently. "Just say the word when you've had enough." Inside, the hall was decorated with paper streamers and wildflowers. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the crowd. People danced, talked, and enjoyed refreshments from a long table at one end of the room. Delilah felt eyes on her as she entered with Matthew. She knew she was the subject of gossip, the widow who had secluded herself for months, now appearing at a social event with Matthew Shaw. Before she could become too uncomfortable, Reverend Thompson approached them, his kind face wreathed in smiles. "Mrs. Blackwood, how wonderful to see you out and about. You've been in our prayers." "Thank you, Reverend," Delilah replied, genuinely grateful for his warmth. "It's good to be here." Others came to greet her, women who had sent food after William's death, men who had attended the funeral. Their kindness overwhelmed Delilah, making her realize how isolated she had allowed herself to become. When the band struck up a waltz, Matthew turned to her. "Would you care to dance?" he asked. "Only if you feel up to it." Delilah hesitated. Dancing seemed frivolous, almost disrespectful to her grief. Yet as she looked around at the couples swirling across the floor, she remembered how much she had once enjoyed such simple pleasures. "Yes," she said finally, "I would like that." Matthew led her onto the dance floor and placed his hand respectfully at her waist. As they began to move with the music, Delilah found herself remembering steps she thought she had forgotten. Matthew was a surprisingly graceful dancer for such a tall man, and she felt secure in his arms. "You dance very well," she commented. A smile touched his lips. "Don't sound so surprised. Cowboys aren't all rough edges." As they waltzed, Delilah became aware of a feeling she hadn't experienced in a very long time: joy. Not the overwhelming happiness she had known with James, or the all-consuming love she had felt for William, but a quiet joy, a momentary respite from sorrow. Later, as they took a break to enjoy some punch, Delilah noticed a few people watching them with undisguised interest. "People are talking about us," she observed. Matthew followed her gaze. "Small towns run on gossip. Does it bother you?" Delilah considered the question. "It should, I suppose. A proper widow wouldn't be dancing so soon after." She trailed off. Grief doesn't have a proper timeline, Matthew said firmly, and no one who has suffered a loss should be judged for finding moments of happiness where they can. His defense touched her. You've become a good friend to me, Matthew Shaw. His blue eyes held hers. Is that all I am to you? A friend. The directness of his question took Delilah by surprise. Before she could formulate a response, they were interrupted by the mayor's wife, eager to welcome Delilah back to society. The moment passed, but Matthew's question lingered in Delilah's mind as the evening continued. By the time they left the dance, the stars were bright in the clear sky. The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they reached Delilah's homestead, Matthew helped her down from the wagon and walked her to her door. "Thank you for tonight," Delilah said softly. "I enjoyed it more than I expected to." "I'm glad," Matthew replied. He hesitated, then spoke again, his voice low. "Delilah, I need to be honest with you. My feelings for you have grown beyond friendship. I understand if that's not something you want or are ready for, but I couldn't go another day without telling you." Delilah's heart raced. Part of her had known this was coming, had perhaps even hoped for it. Yet now that the moment was here, she felt torn between longing and loyalty. "Matthew, I don't know what to say. James hasn't been gone a year, William." Her voice caught. "I know," he said gently. "And I would never ask you to forget them. They'll always be part of you, part of who you are. I'm just asking if there might be room in your heart for someone else too someday." Delilah looked up at him, this man who had become her anchor in a storm of grief. "I need time," she whispered. Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Time is something I can give you." "I'm not going anywhere, Delilah." He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, then turned and walked back to his wagon. Delilah watched him go, her emotions a tangled mess of gratitude, confusion, and something dangerously close to love. Inside her house, Delilah lit a lamp and sat at her table, her mind replaying the evening. She hadn't expected to enjoy herself, hadn't expected to dance or laugh or feel anything but the weight of her losses. Yet for a few hours, she had been simply a woman enjoying the company of a man she admired. Was that a betrayal of James, of William? She didn't know. All she knew was that for the first time since burying her son, she could imagine a future that wasn't defined solely by grief. The days following the dance brought a subtle change to Delilah and Matthew's relationship. Though he continued to visit regularly, there was a new awareness between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings that ran deeper than friendship. Matthew was true to his word, giving Delilah the time she needed without pressure. His attentions remained respectful, focused on practical help and companionship rather than romantic overtures. Yet Delilah found herself increasingly aware of him as a man, the strength in his hands as he chopped wood, the kindness in his eyes when he spoke to her, the warmth of his rare smile. As spring deepened into summer, Delilah's homestead began to thrive under their combined efforts. The vegetable garden yielded a bounty of fresh produce. The milk cow provided more than enough for Delilah's needs, and the henhouse Matthew had repaired was now home to a dozen laying hens. One sweltering July afternoon, they worked together to harvest the first of the season's green beans. The sun beat down mercilessly, causing perspiration to dampen Delilah's dress despite the wide-brimmed bonnet she wore. "Let's take a break," Matthew suggested, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "There's a spot by the creek where it's cooler." They walked to the small creek that ran along the edge of Delilah's property. The water gurgled pleasantly over smooth stones, and tall cottonwoods provided welcome shade. Delilah sank gratefully onto a large rock, while Matthew crouched by the water, splashing his face and neck. "This was James's favorite spot," Delilah said softly. He used to talk about building a proper bench here someday. Matthew glanced at her. Do you still miss him very much? Delilah considered the question. Yes, she answered honestly, but differently now. The pain isn't as sharp. I can think of him, remember him, without feeling like I can't breathe. Matthew nodded in understanding. That's how it was with Sarah, my wife. Time doesn't heal all wounds like people say, but it changes them, makes them bearable. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the water and the rustle of leaves overhead. A dragonfly darted across the creek, its wings catching the sunlight. I've been thinking, Matthew said finally, about what you said at the dance about needing time. I want you to know I understand. There's no rush, no expectation. Delilah looked at him, struck by the sincerity in his face. Thank you for that, for understanding. But I also want you to know, he continued, his blue eyes holding hers, that my feelings haven't changed. If anything, they've grown stronger. Delilah's heart quickened. In the months since they had first met, Matthew had become essential to her life, not just for his practical help, but for his steadfast presence, his quiet strength, his ability to understand her grief without being consumed by it. Matthew, she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. Before she could continue, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted her. Matthew glanced at the sky. Storm's coming. We should get those beans in before it hits. The moment was broken, but as they hurried back to the garden to finish their harvest, Delilah felt a curious lightness in her heart. Perhaps it was time to stop dwelling on what she had lost and start acknowledging what she had found. The summer storm broke just as they finished bringing in the last of the beans. Rain pounded against the roof as they took shelter in Delilah's kitchen, sorting the harvest into baskets for storage and canning. You'll have to stay until it passes, Delilah said, glancing at the torrential downpour outside the window. It's not safe to be riding in this. Matthew nodded his agreement. I've seen lightning strike too many riders in storms like this, if you're sure it's no imposition. Of course not, Delilah assured him. I can make us some supper while we wait. As she busied herself preparing a simple meal of fried salt pork, biscuits, and fresh vegetables, Delilah was acutely aware of Matthew's presence in her small home. There was an intimacy to sharing the space during the storm, a sense of being cut off from the rest of the world. They ate at the kitchen table, the rain creating a soothing backdrop to their conversation. As darkness fell, Delilah lit the lamps, casting a warm glow throughout the room. Tell me about your daughter, she said suddenly. You've never spoken much about her. A shadow crossed Matthew's face, but he nodded. Her name was Emma. She was only 4 months old when the fever took her and Sarah. She had Sarah's eyes the same shade of green and the sweetest smile you've ever seen. I'm sorry, Delilah said softly. I can't imagine losing a child after having known her, after having seen her smile. Every loss is its own kind of pain, Matthew replied. There's no measuring it, no comparing. What you went through with William was just as devastating. Sometimes I wonder if I did something wrong, Delilah confessed, voicing a fear she had never shared with anyone. If there was something I could have done differently that would have saved him. Matthew reached across the table and took her hand. Delilah, look at me. When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, You were a good mother. William's death wasn't your fault. Sometimes life just takes more than we think we can bear. Tears welled in Delilah's eyes at his words. How did you know that's what I needed to hear? Because I blamed myself too, he admitted. For years, I wondered if I could have saved them if I'd gotten the doctor sooner, if I'd recognized the signs earlier. It nearly drove me mad until I finally accepted that some things are beyond our control. Delilah squeezed his hand, feeling a profound connection in their shared understanding of grief. Thank you for telling me about Emma, for sharing her with me. The storm continued well into the night, making it impossible for Matthew to leave. Delilah made up a bed for him on the small sofa in the front room, providing blankets and a pillow. "I'm sorry it's not more comfortable," she apologized. "The sofa is rather short for a man your height." Matthew smiled. "I've slept in far worse places. This is luxury compared to a bedroll under the stars during a cattle drive." As Delilah prepared to retire to her own bedroom, she paused in the doorway. "Matthew," he looked up, already seated on the sofa removing his boots. "Yes." "I'm glad you're here. Not just tonight, but in my life." The smile that spread across his face warmed her to her core. "I'm glad too, Delilah, more than you know." That night, as Delilah lay in her bed listening to the rain, she found herself thinking of the future for the first time in months. Not a future defined by loss and survival, but one that might include joy, purpose, and perhaps even love again. The storm passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling in the early light. Matthew departed after breakfast, needing to check on his ranch and livestock, but not before promising to return in a few days. As summer progressed, Delilah found herself increasingly drawn to Matthew. Their relationship deepened, built on a foundation of shared grief and mutual respect. Matthew continued to help around her homestead, and Delilah began occasionally riding to his ranch to assist with household tasks there. His home was larger than hers, a sturdy two-story structure with wide verandas and comfortable furnishings. Yet despite its size, it lacked the warmth of a woman's touch. Delilah found herself making small improvements: curtains for the windows, wildflowers in jars on the tables, reorganizing the kitchen for efficiency. Matthew never commented on these changes, but she often caught him watching her with a look that made her heart race. The question he had asked at the dance still hung between them, unanswered but not forgotten. On a warm August evening, they sat together on Delilah's porch, enjoying the sunset and the cool breeze that offered relief from the day's heat. Matthew had brought a bottle of wine, a luxury rarely seen in these parts, and they sipped it from Delilah's best glasses. "I received a letter today," Delilah said, breaking a comfortable silence, "from my cousin in St. Louis. She's invited me to come stay with her family." Matthew's hand stilled, the glass halfway to his lips. "Are you considering it?" Delilah watched his reaction carefully. "I thought about it for a moment." And his voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "And I realized I don't want to leave," she said simply. "This is my home now, despite everything, or perhaps because of everything." The relief in Matthew's eyes was palpable. "I'm glad to hear that. Very glad." Delilah set down her glass and turned to face him fully. "Matthew, I've been thinking about what you said about your feelings for me, about whether there might be room in my heart for someone else." Matthew waited, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "James will always be part of me," Delilah continued, "as will William, but I've come to realize that loving them doesn't mean I can't also love someone else." Matthew set his own glass aside and took her hands in his. "Delilah, are you saying what I think you're saying?" Delilah's heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "I'm saying that I care for you, Matthew Shaw, more than I ever expected to care for anyone again. And if your offer still stands, I'd like to see where these feelings might lead us." Matthew's face transformed with joy. "My offer stands," he assured her. "It has every day since I met you." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he pressed his lips gently to hers in a kiss that was both tender and reverent. Delilah closed her eyes, surrendering to the warmth that spread through her at his touch. When they parted, she saw in Matthew's eyes the same wonder she felt, the miracle of finding love when both had thought it lost to them forever. "I won't rush you," he promised. We'll take this at whatever pace feels right to you. Delilah nodded, grateful for his understanding. Thank you. They spent the remainder of the evening talking about everything and nothing, their hands often finding each other, small touches confirming the shift in their relationship. When Matthew finally left for the night, his goodbye kiss lingered, full of promise for the future. Over the next few weeks, Delilah and Matthew's courtship blossomed. They attended church together on Sundays, dined at each other's homes, and spent long evenings in conversation. Matthew introduced Delilah to his favorite fishing spot on the river, and she taught him to make her mother's apple pie recipe. Word of their relationship spread quickly through the community, but to Delilah's relief, most reactions were positive. People seemed genuinely happy to see both of them finding happiness after such profound losses. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of color to the leaves, Matthew invited Delilah to accompany him on a special outing. "Wear your riding clothes," he instructed, "and pack a lunch. We'll be gone most of the day." Curious, Delilah did as he asked. Matthew arrived early, leading not only his own horse but also a gentle mare for Delilah. "She's yours," he said when Delilah admired the beautiful chestnut horse. "I know you've been borrowing Mrs. Peterson's old gelding when you need to ride into town. Thought you might like a mount of your own." Delilah was speechless at the generosity of the gift. "Matthew, I can't possibly—" "You can," he interrupted gently. "And you will. Consider it a practical necessity for a woman with a homestead to maintain." Recognizing that he had phrased it in terms she couldn't argue with, Delilah conceded. "Thank you. She's beautiful." "Her name is Penny," Matthew said, helping Delilah mount. "She's even tempered and sure-footed, perfect for these mountain trails." They rode for several hours, following a path that wound up into the foothills above Denver. The day was perfect, clear blue skies, the air crisp but not cold, the landscape painted in the rich golds and reds of early autumn. When they reached a high meadow overlooking the valley, Matthew suggested they stop for lunch. The view was breathtaking, the town of Denver spread out below them, the plains stretching eastward as far as the eye could see, the majestic Rocky Mountains rising to the west. After they had eaten, Matthew grew uncharacteristically quiet. Delilah watched him, sensing he had something important to say. "I brought you here for a reason," he finally began. "This was where I came after Sarah and Emma died. I would ride up here and sit for hours, trying to make sense of a world that had taken everything from me." He paused, his gaze on the distant mountains. "It was here that I finally found some measure of peace, not answers but acceptance." Delilah listened, understanding the significance of him sharing this place with her. "I never thought I'd love again," Matthew continued, turning to face her. "Never wanted to. The risk seemed too great. But then I met you, Delilah, a woman who had suffered her own losses yet still had such strength, such capacity for kindness." He took her hands in his. "These past months with you have been the happiest I've known in years. You've brought light back into my life when I thought I'd live in darkness forever." Delilah felt tears gather in her eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. "I know it hasn't been long," Matthew acknowledged, "and I'll understand if you think it's too soon. But I love you, Delilah. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life with you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small gold ring. "This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it as my wife." Delilah stared at the ring, her heart full to bursting. She had not expected this, had not allowed herself to imagine a future so full of hope and possibility. "Matthew," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I thought my life was over when I lost James and William. I didn't want to go on. But you showed me that it was possible to live again, to find joy again." She looked into his eyes, seeing all the love she felt reflected back at her. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." Matthew's face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When he kissed her, it was with a passion that spoke of promises kept and futures shared. As they rode back down the mountain later that afternoon, Delilah felt a sense of rightness settle over her. She would always carry the memories of James and William in her heart, but now there was room for new memories, new love. Matthew had not replaced what she had lost. Nothing could do that, but he had given her something equally precious, a second chance at happiness. Their engagement was met with genuine delight from the community. The Reverend Thompson, upon hearing the news, offered to perform the ceremony whenever they were ready. Friends and neighbors stopped by with congratulations and small gifts for the bride-to-be. Matthew and Delilah agreed on a simple wedding in early October, when the autumn colors would be at their peak. They decided to make their home at Matthew's ranch, which was larger and better established than Delilah's homestead. The house James had built would be rented to a young couple just arriving from the east, ensuring it would be well maintained rather than standing empty. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with preparations. Delilah sewed a new dress from fine blue silk Matthew had ordered specially from Denver. Matthew expanded his house, adding a larger kitchen and a second bedroom for the future they both hoped might include children someday. On the morning of their wedding day, Delilah visited William's grave one last time as a Blackwood. The pine sapling Matthew had planted was thriving, already nearly 2 feet tall. "I'm getting married today," she told her son softly, kneeling beside the grave. "To a good man who has helped me through the darkest time of my life. I think you would have liked him." She touched the small headstone, tracing the letters of William's name. "I'll always love you, my sweet boy, always." As she rose to leave, she noticed a small blue butterfly resting on the pine sapling. It fluttered its wings once, twice, then took flight, circling Delilah before heading skyward. She watched it go, a sense of peace settling over her. The wedding took place in the small church in Denver, filled to capacity with friends and well-wishers. Delilah wore her blue silk dress and carried a bouquet of autumn wildflowers. Matthew, dressed in a new suit, waited for her at the altar, his face lighting up as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Everyone present understood the significance of these two people, who had each endured such profound loss, finding love again. The celebration afterward was joyous, a community gathering with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire town. As the evening wore on, Matthew took Delilah's hand and led her outside, away from the noise and crowd. Under a canopy of stars, he held her close. "Are you happy, Mrs. Shaw?" Delilah looked up at him, her heart full. "Happier than I ever thought possible again. I promise to spend every day trying to keep you that way," he said softly, before lowering his lips to hers. Their life together began in earnest the following day. Delilah moved her belongings to Matthew's ranch, which quickly began to feel like home under her care. Together they established a rhythm, sharing the work and the rewards of ranch life. Matthew's cattle business prospered, and Delilah started a small side business selling preserves and baked goods in town. They worked hard during the days and spent their evenings together, reading aloud or simply talking by the fire. As winter approached, bringing the first snows to the Colorado mountains, their home became a warm sanctuary against the cold. Matthew had ensured they had ample supplies for the season would stacked high against the house. The root cellar filled with preserves and vegetables, the smokehouse full of cured meats. One snowy evening in December, as they sat together in front of the fire, Delilah set aside her mending and turned to Matthew. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. Matthew looked up from his book. "What is it, love?" Delilah took his hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. "We're going to have a baby, in the summer." Matthew's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the span of seconds. "A baby," he whispered, as if afraid speaking too loudly might make the news untrue. "You're certain?" Delilah nodded, tears of happiness in her eyes. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Matthew gathered her into his arms, holding her with infinite tenderness. "Oh, Delilah," he murmured against her hair. "I never thought, after Emma. I didn't dare hope." "I know," she said softly. "I felt the same way, but it seems life has more gifts for us than we imagined." They sat together long into the night, talking about the future, making plans, sharing both their joy and their inevitable fears. The loss of their previous children had taught them the fragility of life, the uncertainty of tomorrow. But it had also taught them to cherish each moment, each blessing. "We'll take each day as it comes," Matthew said, his hand resting protectively over Delilah's still flat stomach. "And whatever happens, we'll face it together." The winter passed slowly, as Colorado winters tend to do, but for Delilah and Matthew it was a time of quiet happiness. Delilah's body changed gradually, her figure filling out, a healthy glow in her cheeks. Matthew watched over her with loving attentiveness, insisting she rest often and taking on more of the household chores. As her pregnancy progressed, they prepared the second bedroom as a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and setting up the cradle James had made for William. Using it had been Matthew's suggestion. "We shouldn't hide away the memories of those we've lost," he had said. "They're part of our story, part of what brought us together." Delilah had been touched by his understanding, his willingness to incorporate her past into their present rather than asking her to forget. Spring arrived with its usual glory, wildflowers carpeting the meadows, new calves in the pastures, longer days filled with sunshine. Delilah, now visibly pregnant, found herself filled with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety as the summer approached. What if something goes wrong? She confided to Matthew one evening, giving voice to the fear that had been growing alongside their child. "I couldn't bear to lose another baby." Matthew took her in his arms, his strength steady and reassuring. "I won't tell you not to worry because I worry too. But you're healthy, the baby is active, and Dr. Wilson says everything looks normal. We have to believe in the possibility of happiness, Delilah. Otherwise, what's the point of any of it?" His words comforted her, reminding her of how far they had both come from the depths of their grief. They had found each other in darkness and built something beautiful together, a marriage, a home, a future. On a warm July morning, as the sun rose over the eastern plains, Delilah went into labor. Matthew sent their ranch hand galloping for Dr. Wilson while he stayed by Delilah's side, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping her brow, murmuring words of encouragement. The labor was long and difficult, stretching into the afternoon and then the evening. Dr. Wilson arrived and did what he could to ease Delilah's pain, but childbirth in 1884 was still largely a matter of a woman's strength and endurance. As midnight approached, Delilah's strength began to wane. "I can't do this," she gasped after a particularly grueling contraction. "Matthew, I'm so tired." Matthew knelt beside the bed, his face etched with concern but his voice steady. "You can do this, Delilah. You're the strongest person I've ever known. Just a little longer, my love." Drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, Delilah pushed with renewed determination. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, their child entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the room. "A boy, Doctor," Wilson announced, cleaning and wrapping the infant before placing him in Delilah's arms. "A healthy baby boy." Delilah stared down at her son, taking in his tiny features, his shock of dark hair, his perfect fingers and toes. Relief and joy washed over her in equal measure. "He's beautiful," she whispered. Matthew sat beside her on the bed, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand gently touching his son's cheek. "He's perfect," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion, "just like his mother." As they gazed at their child in wonder, Delilah thought of the journey that had brought them to this moment, the losses they had endured, the grief they had shared, the love that had grown between them. From the depths of despair, they had found their way to this new beginning. "What shall we name him?" Matthew asked softly. Delilah looked up at her husband, seeing in his eyes all the love and strength that had sustained her through the darkest times. "I thought perhaps James Matthew Shaw, to honor the past and the present." Tears glistened in Matthew's eyes. "James Matthew," he repeated. "It's a good name, a strong name." As dawn broke over the Colorado mountains, the little family remained huddled together in the soft light of the bedroom. Outside, life on the ranch continued, cattle lowing in the fields, birds beginning their morning songs, the world turning toward another day. Inside, Delilah and Matthew held their miracle, a testament to the resilience of the human heart, its capacity to heal, to love again, to find joy even after the deepest sorrow. "Thank you," Matthew whispered, pressing a kiss to Delilah's temple. "For our son, for our life together, for everything." Delilah leaned against him, exhausted but happier than she had ever thought possible. "And thank you," she replied softly, "for finding me in that cold, empty house, for grieving with me, for staying close until I could find my way back to life." As little James dozed in her arms, Delilah knew with certainty that while the path ahead might hold challenges and even sorrows, they would face them together, two souls who had learned that love could be lost and found again, that joy could rise from grief, that even in the wildest, most untamed places, the human heart could find its home. In the years that followed, the Shaw Ranch prospered. Matthew's cattle business expanded, and Delilah's preserves became sought-after items at the general store in Denver. Their son James grew into a strong, kind-hearted boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's gentle spirit. When James was 3, the family welcomed a daughter, Emma Sarah, named for the children they had lost. Unlike her brother's easy birth, Emma's arrival was quick and uncomplicated, as if she were eager to join the family. She had her mother's auburn hair and a determined temperament that kept them all on their toes. The house expanded along with the family, additional bedrooms, a larger kitchen, a proper dining room for entertaining. Yet despite these improvements, they maintained the warmth and simplicity that had characterized their home from the beginning. Every year on William's birthday, Delilah and Matthew took the children to visit his grave. The pine tree now stood tall and strong, providing shade for the small headstone. They laid wildflowers there and told James and Emma about the brother they would never meet, but who would always be part of their family history. Similarly, they kept a small portrait of Sarah and baby Emma on the mantelpiece, ensuring that all parts of their past were honored and remembered. The children grew up understanding that love didn't diminish when shared, that the heart had room for those present and those gone. As Delilah watched her family thrive, Matthew teaching James to ride, Emma following Delilah around the kitchen, eager to learn every recipe, the four of them gathering for meals and stories and laughter, she often thought of that cold, empty house where Matthew had found her. How different her life would have been if he hadn't knocked on her door that winter day, if he hadn't had the courage to grieve with her, to stay close even when she tried to push him away. On their 10th wedding anniversary, after the children were asleep, Matthew presented Delilah with a small wooden box he had carved himself. "What's this?" she asked, running her fingers over the intricate design on the lid. "Open it," he urged, his eyes warm with love. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a gold locket. When Delilah opened it, she found a tiny portrait of William on one side and a small lock of his baby hair on the other treasures she had kept wrapped in linen in her dresser drawer. "I thought you might like to keep him close to your heart," Matthew explained softly. Tears filled Delilah's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift, the deep understanding it represented. "Will you help me put it on?" Matthew fastened the locket around her neck, then turned her to face him. "I love you, Delilah Shaw, more with each passing day." Delilah reached up to touch his face, marveling at the journey that had brought them together. "And I love you, Matthew Shaw, for finding me, for saving me, for building this beautiful life with me." As they embraced beneath the star-filled Colorado sky, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that the greatest gift life could offer wasn't protection from sorrow, but rather the discovery that joy could be found again, even in the aftermath of the deepest grief. Matthew had taught her that. Together, they had proven it, and in that knowledge lay a peace that would sustain them through all the years to come.